We live our lives surrounded by rules. Rules for driving, rules for how we do business, and yeah, even those unwritten rules for how we treat each other. But what happens when we decide a rule is just wrong? Or when a situation comes along that seems to demand we break it? Okay, let's really get into this and explore the totally unexpected, sometimes crazy consequences of challenging the systems we all live by. And we're going to start with a story that is surprisingly down to earth. It all kicks off with one tiny mistake that spirals into a massive ethical nightmare. So, this is comedy writer Michael Schur. You probably know his work. But he's not talking about a TV script here. Nope. He's talking about a little fender bender his wife had back in 2005. A moment that, believe it or not, made him question everything he thought he knew about what it means to be a good person. Okay, so here's the deal. His wife barely taps another car. The owner comes back wanting $836 for a scratch that Schur can hardly even see. And this just felt so incredibly petty to him, especially because at that exact moment, Hurricane Katrina was just absolutely destroying New Orleans. So, running on pure high-octane self-righteousness, Schur makes what he thinks is this incredibly noble counteroffer. But when the guy doesn't just jump at the chance, Schur takes it public. He starts a blog, and get this, within a day, he's raised over $25,000 in pledges from total strangers, all designed to publicly shame this one guy into doing what Schur thought was the right thing. He was about to win, a total viral victory. But then, you know that awful sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach? He gets that, big time. He's suddenly convinced he's made a terrible, terrible mistake. So, he does what any of us would obviously do. He starts cold calling philosophy professors for help. First up, he learns about Immanuel Kant, who asks this really powerful question. Just imagine that the rule you're acting on right now suddenly becomes a universal law for everybody. Schur's rule was basically, in any minor disagreement, you can bring up a global tragedy to shame the other person. And he realized, wow, a world that runs on that rule would be an absolute nightmare. So next, he looks at Aristotle. For Aristotle, it's all about virtues, and having them in just the right amount. Not too much, not too little. The sweet spot. And it became pretty obvious to Schur he was showing, a massive excess of anger and a serious lack of friendliness. He was not nailing it. Utilitarianism was kind of his last hope. This idea is simple. Just look at the outcome. Did you create more happiness in the world than pain? On one hand, sure, the money going to charity would help a lot of people. But, and this is a big but, utilitarianism forces you to count the suffering caused by his public shaming. What kind of world does it create if we can just summon online mobs to settle our small claims? That widespread negativity could easily outweigh the good of one donation. So Schur's story shows just how messy things get when one person decides to break the rules. But this whole dilemma scales up big time. Let's shift gears and look at the world of art, where a massive rebellion against the rules changed, well, pretty much everything. For centuries, art had a clear mission, the pursuit of perfection, of beauty, of excellence. But then, a revolution started brewing. Now, according to one analysis, it all started with the Impressionists. They began a rebellion against the classical standards of masters like Michelangelo, which led to this whole new philosophy, aesthetic relativism. That's really just a fancy way of saying there are no universal standards for what's beautiful. It's all subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And just like that, the goal of art shifted from creating something masterful to creating something expressive. So to really show what this means in practice, art historian Robert Florzak gives his graduate students a little test. He puts this image up on the screen and asks them one simple question. Tell me why this is a masterpiece. And boy, do they deliver. They come up with these brilliant, professional-sounding analyses. They talk about the dynamic composition, the raw emotional power, the sophisticated color theory, all the things you'd say about a great piece of abstract expressionism. And then he drops the bomb. It's not a Jackson Pollock. It's not even a painting. It's just a close-up picture of the paint splatters on his work apron. The argument being made here is that when you throw out objective standards, you kind of lose the ability to tell the difference between a work of genius and, well, a random mess. This whole debate over breaking the rules gets way, way more serious when it's not just about art and culture, but about the wealth and well-being of an entire country. So let's turn to one perspective on the Great Depression. This particular analysis makes the case that a whole series of government actions, basically attempts to rewrite the rules of the economy, actually took a bad situation and made it so much worse. Now, you really have to pay attention to the timeline on this slide because this is where it gets fascinating. After the big crash in 29, unemployment shot up, sure, but by the middle of 1930, it was actually falling. The market was showing signs of healing itself. But that very same month, the government passed a huge tariff to protect American jobs, and that's when, according to this analysis, things went off a cliff. Just 5 months later, unemployment hit double digits for the very first time. The argument here, put forward by economist Thomas Sowell, is that this first big intervention, followed by years of unpredictable New Deal policies, created total chaos and uncertainty. Businesses had no idea what rule changes were coming next, so they stopped investing, stopped hiring, and unemployment stayed stuck in the double digits for the rest of the 1930s. So what finally ended the Great Depression? From this point of view, the answer is pretty stark: World War II. And a huge part of that was because it took 12 million men out of the civilian workforce and put them in the military. This constant tug of war between established systems and the people who want to tear them down has now moved from the physical world into a new invisible battlefield that pretty much runs our entire lives. That's right, we're talking about cybersecurity. This is where the rules that hold our digital world together are under a constant 24/7 assault from a massive army of rule breakers. And these rule breakers, or hackers, they've got a whole playbook of tricks. They use things called zero-day attacks, which means they find and use a security flaw before the good guys even know it exists. And then there's social engineering, which is less about fancy code and more about messing with your head. Think about that scary email that looks like it's from your boss, urgently asking you to wire money. That's them. It's a never-ending cat and mouse game between the builders and the breakers. So, from a fender bender to the world to the global economy, and now to our digital lives, we keep seeing this same pattern. Systems of rules get built, and then people come along to challenge them, which of course brings up a really important question for all of us. Because, as Michael Schur points out so perfectly, this isn't just some academic discussion. He guarantees that life is, eventually, going to put you to the test. You're going to find yourself in a messy, confusing situation where the rules don't seem to apply and every option feels wrong. So how in the world do you prepare for that moment? Well, Schur argues you should think of it like practicing for a big game. You'll never be 100% ready, but by studying these different ethical ideas and looking at how things played out in the past, you can start to train your moral muscles. So look, this isn't just about understanding the world. It's about preparing yourself to live in it, because the rules will always be challenged. The only real question is, when the test comes for you, will you be ready?